Yo, what is up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see what if Naruto becomes the Black Mage, part 4. Hope you will enjoy the video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. So let's get into the video.
Waterja. A huge globe of water exploded into existence above the training area, easily 50 feet in diameter. It hovered for a bit, before twisting and twining into a 100-foot-long water dragon, twisting through the air and knocking over a few trees with slight flicks of its tail. The doll's tail slammed downward in front of it, but didn't harm the ground, as Naruto snapped his fingers, the Nora flaring into existence for a moment. Another word slipped into the air, before the water changed again. Lizaja. The water dragon exploded into a shower of rain, before freezing into hundreds of thousands of ice needles, impacting the training area's earth without even a sound, a testament to how sharp they were to slip in without much resistance. They all slipped back out, leaving tiny pinpricks where they were, before slamming into each other, and forming a large prism out of ice that hovered into the air before dropping to the ground. As soon as it made contact, the area around the prism flash froze, turning grass to ice, before it exploded into a shower of glass-like shards, dissolving into the air, as the grass thawed. Naruto gave a wistful smile at the sight, remembering Haku's ability, and her subsequent hint of unlocking fusion elements. He quickly moved on to the next element, clearly aware that there were another two observers hidden in the trees. He felt no malicious intent from them, and allowed them to continue to watch, as he brought both arms above his head, the doll mimicking his actions with its tails. The purple aura reappeared, darkened slightly more, before dissipating, as he brought both arms in a vicious downward motion together. The word that escaped his mouth was nearly lost in the effects following it. Tendaja. Through the bright clear sky, 15 lightning bolts, easily 2 feet thick, collided with each other over 30 feet above their heads before combining, and slamming into the earth below them, the white beam of energy easily 10 feet across, and even a foot or two thick. He toned down the electrical charge that escaped the ground, so that he didn't give anyone more than a minor shock of the electricity, but the ground was unable to contain it all, and exploded when struck. An echoing boom rattled the leaves in the trees in the wake of the lightning bolt. Without missing a beat, he moved to the next spell, turning to an unoccupied set of trees, before delivering a swift palm thrust, accentuated by the movements of his doll, as well as his mana springing to life for a moment. Airjaw. Slicing gusts of wind shredded well over 50 trees into something akin to the consistency of sand, the poor bark never standing a chance to the incredibly precise blades of wind hitting within the storming gale that completely surrounded the trees. Taking aim at a place that wouldn't be too destructive, he released his second-to-last elemental spell, the purple aura staying after this one, as he really needed the power for the last. Faraja. Over 100 feet above them in the air, the sky combusted into a brilliant explosion of white-hot fire, spreading easily at least 30 feet in every direction before imploding on itself, as he didn't wish for the forest to catch fire. The purple aura was nearly black, as it twisted and twined about him, and he raised both hands up before slamming them onto the ground, the doll miming every movement. Kokeha. The earth groaned and cracked in protest to the spell, before hundreds of thousands of branching spears of earth erupted from the ground. They only stayed for a moment, though, before disappearing, and the earth returned to how it was before the sparring ever even started, all the craters and dents filled from the added power to the spell. The black mage turned to the shell-shocked green Jounin, his doll smirking at the two unnoticed others within the trees, before hopping into the blonde's arms. The teen raised an elegant blonde eyebrow, not looking winded in the least at his inhuman display, before asking his question. Is that all you needed to see? I can do a few more things, but I'd rather not. Not even my earth manipulation can restore the destruction of the ability I used at the end of my C rank. It's hard enough to contain that technique, and not allow it to affect anything that isn't caught in it, and the poor trees have suffered enough today. I nodded a little, his 3 genin were almost falling out of the tree at the awesome power displayed. The Jounin was greatly relieved that he didn't fight the boy in all-out combat, as the abilities displayed were quite destructive. He wasn't joking when he said he specialized in widespread demolition. The two bystanders, still unnoticed to all but Naruto, nodded to each other before disappearing. The blonde, as if remembering why he first came here, struck an elaborate thinking pose, the doll hopping to his head and lying there motionlessly, before he asked a question that had the genin team falling out of the tree and flat on their faces. I also wanted to ask where you bought your spandex suits, as I believe Haddock-san could do with the youthfulness that they provide. I also wish to, as he seems to have a grudge against me, deprive him of his mask, and bear witness to the mystery of the world known as Kakashi's face. If nothing else, it will serve as blackmail material, should he try to set me up with a potentially fatal enemy again. I was once again shocked at how youthful his rival was being, all for a simple grudge. He was trying to get his own student killed. He couldn't detect a lie from the blonde young man, and that scared him. It meant his rival truly was blinded by uncalled-for hatred and anger at this boy over nothing, and was using his status as the blonde sensei to try to get him killed. It was at that moment that the eternal rivalry between Guy and Kakashi ended, as the guy in green found that the rival he had been competing against seemed to have, indeed, fallen from grace. Guy told the blonde where the store was that sold the spandex bodysuits he always wore, also politely asking the boy if he would mind stopping by his apartment sometime, so that they could discuss his hand-to-hand style, as Guy was incredibly interested in it, and would want to write down how to correctly train a person in this style. Naruto's lips quivered upwards in a semblance of a slight smile, and nodded to the Taijutsu master. He didn't mind the man all that much, really, despite the exuberance and youthfulness. The man had some honor, held a strict code of morals, and wouldn't use the knowledge gained from the Black Mage for selfish reasons. With the location of where the spandex could be bought ascertained, Naruto sat against the trunk of a tree that hadn't been felled, and listened to Guy's lesson plan. He could wait a bit to remove Kakashi's mask. He really was interested in this teamwork theory that Kakashi always talked about, right before he pandered to Sasuke's every whim, and ignored both him and Sakura. He watched, as Team 9 practiced under Guy's watchful eye, slightly surprised at what they were able to do. He did have to put up with Niji's curious, yet still haughty, gaze when the Hyuga turned on his Byakugan, as he was unable to see Naruto's chakra coils, or any chakra whatsoever, as well as the red energy seeming to be stored within the doll on his head. Naruto simply shrugged his shoulders, and used the end-all be-all excuse of excuses. Bloodline thing. They'd buy it, usually, though Guy was looking quite suspicious, and thoughtful. Naruto would play a little with Kyuubi while they were practicing, and training, doing his own unique training. It nearly gave Niji a heart attack to see a 1/10 scale model of him, shiny hair and everything, created as a golem of earth, though with realistic coloring and details. Tenten had thought it was cute, and had glomped it, squealing slightly. Naruto knew not to say anything about that, as he was certain she was hiding pointy objects somewhere, just waiting to throw them at anything that dared call her a fangirl. Lee thought it was youthful, however, once he finally set up his little training playground in front of him, and the Kyuubi toy. There were 4 figures each doing something different, each created out of a different element that corresponded with their personalities. Niji was cold, unforgiving, unmovable in his views, and stoic, so he was an earth golem. Tenten was piercing, striking with deadly accuracy, and had a bipolar personality. She was focused and unflinching in a fight, but slightly bubbly, and humble off the battlefield, so she was lightning. Lee was effervescent, always here or there, but never anywhere for long. His fighting style of Goken focused on straightforward strikes, but he combined it with a bit of acrobatics to slowly mold the style to fit him and his personality. He was a wind golem. Finally there was Guy. He seemed to also be bipolar, in a different way. He was youthful and exuberant on or off the field, but when faced with something potentially threatening or something he was highly interested in, he became serious and focused. He molded his students into powerful shinobi, yet was able to keep their clashing views from causing much infighting. He was gentle when he needed to be, yet incredibly powerful when the time demanded it. He was a water golem. The Lee and Ichi golems were sparring in perfectly imitated versions of their taijutsu styles, with the Guy golem yelling in a grand imitation of the instructor, to have the Tenten golem improve their evasion by throwing projectiles at them. He wanted her to miss by exactly 1 centimeter, should they be unable to move out of the way, and the Tenten golem did exactly that. Guy had come over to inspect the faux battlefield, and he was surprised at how accurate everything was. When he asked what Naruto was doing, the boy had given him a rather interesting answer. Well, I spend my free time improving not only my control, so that I may someday use my ultimate technique without harming anything I don't want to, but I also work on fusion between elements. You saw a glimpse of that when I showed you each of my elements, as I had gotten a hint from a powerful woman with the Hyotin, ice element, bloodline on how to mix wind and water to create ice. I was able to use it before, but it took an immense amount of force to create the element, and now the ice element is coming quite a bit better with her help. The final thing I'm working on is seeing if I can create working automatons through my manipulation. Before our C-rank mission, I was able to create about 5-inch tall figures, and a perfect replica of my doll, but this is how far I've come now. It also helps that I have a photographic memory, allowing me, should I wish to simply see the entirety of a fighting style just by one viewing. I refuse to pick apart other people's fighting styles, though, and refuse to use my memory to create a variation of the Sharingan. I find that stealing from your comrades is one of the worst things possible, so I use the stored knowledge in a rather interesting way. I have my golems replicate what I've seen, and if I'm near people I've remembered something from, I'll sit back and see if they can find anything to help themselves from seeing their likeness in pitched combat. Think of it like this. I'm always recording everything that I'm seeing, and I dislike the thought of becoming like Haddock-san, so I use my gift to help others. Instead of teaching stolen techniques, I use the knowledge to allow people to view themselves in the third person, and be able to better their own training by seeing how they fight. I was rather astonished at this, as it was a great use of something like that. He could clearly see how the teen's memory could be considered a curse, given how he had seen how Kakashi acted with his copying eye. Niji, Lee, and Tenten were struck between awe and slight endearment. It was a rather obscure, yet highly useful ability, and the blonde had found a way to not let the knowledge go to waste, yet not really do anything with it, besides allow other people to view themselves and hone techniques. They watched their respective golems, and realized that it was, indeed, a near-perfect replication of each of their ways of fighting. They sat down to watch themselves for a few minutes, each picking up a few things they could work on the next day from watching the miniatures fight. Tenten was quite curious as to how many Tenten got all her weapons, and Naruto gave a slight smirk and a cryptic reply. The wonders of elemental manipulation know no bounds, Tenten-san. I immediately caught on to what he was saying, and vowed to himself to teach the three their respective elemental affinities. Before long, their training session was over, and Naruto bid them a farewell before vanishing in a flurry of ice crystals, which held in the air for a moment, twinkling and sparkling, before evaporating as well. Kakashi's house. Kakashi was currently taking a light nap, as his brooding at the memorial stone had taken a lot out of him. He wasn't a natural at angst, like Inari or Sasuke, but he really had great things to be angry about. First was his old teammate, Ichihabito, who died, and gave him his Sharingan eye. He had died in a rock slide, and Kakashi felt it was his fault, as if he had simply agreed to go rescue Rin earlier. Perhaps the stone nins wouldn't have caught them unawares with the rock slide technique. Secondly was his other teammate, Inuzuka Rin. She had been captured by stone nins, and his own stubbornness of wanting to finish the mission instead of saving her came at a heavy price. She was severely injured from her escape attempt by the time he had come to save her, and she only lasted long enough to use the medical to fully transplant Obito's eye into Kakashi's socket before dying from blood loss. Finally was his sensei, Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime. He had given his life to seal the demon away about 15 years ago, and Kakashi blamed the Jinchuriki for his sensei's death. The fox was the most powerful of the Bijuu, surely the container had to have been corrupted by its influence. Of course, the idea that the seal was absolutely foolproof, seeing as how his sensei was a brilliant man with seals, never crossed his mind, and he blamed it all on the Jinchuriki. Then that new blonde student of his has the gall to have a Kyuubi doll around him, and even uses it in a fight. Apparently, without the trademark blue eyes and whisker marks on his cheeks, Naruto was damn near unrecognizable. Due to Kakashi's pure laziness, he had never even bothered to learn the Jinchuriki's name, simply knowing that it was the fox container with gold hair, blue eyes, and whisker marks. Also due to his uncaring nature when it came to anything besides the Uchiha, he really didn't care that almost everyone else in the village knew that his student was that same Jinchuriki, as every time someone brought it up to him, he was too busy with his porn to notice. Eventually the man will grow a working brain, or so we must hope. He was currently mulling over his thoughts on how his student had gold hair, purple eyes, had a Kyuubi doll, his abilities didn't use chakra it seemed, and he was the correct age to match the Jinchuriki before it disappeared. Kyuubi had red eyes. Blue plus red equals purple. Right, as he made the connection, he was distracted from his train of thought, as an odd draft was felt across his face. That's odd, I always have my mask on, so the only way I could feel a draft is if. He bolted up in bed, eyes wide in the darkness of his bedroom. He removed the hit I-8 from his head, allowing his Sharingan eye to hopefully pierce the darkness, but was blinded before he could see who removed his mask by a bright flash of white light. Several other flashes followed it, as well as the telltale click sound of a camera going off. He blinked rapidly to clear his vision, and horribly mangled whoever was the newest attempt at seeing his unmasked face, but by the time his vision returned to normal, the only trace of his assailant was a single snowflake fluttering in the breeze. He vowed to find who was able to figure out what he looked like, destroy the camera, and destroy all copies of those pictures. He was just about to go into a berserker frenzy when his thoughts strayed back to where they were going. His blonde student that he so hated was the Jinchuriki. He had more cause to kill him now, and would be hailed as a hero for it. He was nearly giddy with that news, and promptly forgot the intruder who saw his face, as he started to plan on how he would get his student killed. Good thing he never taught the demon anything, though his powers were already great. Just more proof that the fox was manipulating the child. Let's leave him to his delusions, shall we? Back with Naruto. Naruto appeared in the Hokage's office in a swirl of delicate snowflakes, startling the Jounin meeting currently in place. He really couldn't care the fuck less right now, because he had pictures of Kakashi's face, and nothing could ruin the good mood. Not even the unnatural amount of hate coming from most of the Jounin in the room. He strode purposefully up to the Hokage, before tapping his temple, and creating a transparent screen out of pure mana on the wall behind his desk. His first words shocked the room to the core. I have come from my self-imposed SSS class mission, Hokage-sama, and I was successful. I have physical, as well as mental proof of what the fuck Haddock-san looks like under that mask. Allow me to show you from my memory what he looks like, while I wait for the pictures to be ready for printing. The screen flickered a little, before an image appeared on it. It was Kakashi, devoid of masquerade, eyes wide, and unseeing. The scar across his left eye was quite prominent, but nobody was caring about that. The man's face was absolutely perfect. Unmarred skin, pale from lack of sunlight, adorned where the face mask usually covered, with only a tan line marking where the mask usually was. Many of the Jounin Kunoichi were staring in shock, awe, and a little bit of lust for the perfect face. They didn't really care that the demon was the one to finally complete the mission, as he had completed it, and there were results. Two notable exceptions were Yuhi Kurenai, Jinjutsu Mistress, and Mitarashi Anko, Snake Mistress, and Torturer Extraordinaire. They were glancing at Naruto with a little bit of awe, as well as a tiny bit of regret. Naruto really couldn't care less at the moment, though, as he let the image hang in the air for a few seconds before dissipating back to his mind. He nodded politely to the shell-shocked room before giving the Hokage a slight bow, and making a polite exit. I am sorry for interrupting your meeting, Hokage-sama, but I felt that, as it was such a momentous occasion, you could forgive this intrusion. He disappeared into thin air after relaying that, his shunshin even more dramatic than ever. As he disappeared, a swirl of ice prisms about the size of half a kunai ascended upwards in his wake. They all refracted the light in a brilliant array across the room, before shattering with a slight tinkling sound, and evaporating. Quite a few, after getting over their shock of seeing Kakashi's face, had their jaws on the floor from such an elaborate technique. The control, as well as the elemental manipulation, to achieve that feat was enormous. One Jounin, however, stood apart from the rest. He was newly released from Anbu after serving the standard 4-year term, and his name was Tenzo, though he preferred to go by Yamato. His thoughts were on the track of if he was able to recreate Hyoten, would he also be able to recreate Mokuton, wood element. The ex-Anbu decided he might have a little chat with Naruto about the possibilities of that. He didn't really care if the boy was a Jinchuriki or not, as the bloodline of the Shodaime Hokage had two parts. One was the wood element, and the second was the ability to repress the demon's influence. If the teen tried anything using his demon's power, he'd just suppress it with his power, and he was positive he could fight off the boy if he wasn't using the Kyuubi. That night, Naruto snuck inside Kakashi's house with the grace of a cat, making absolutely no sounds. He used a mana construct to hide him from sight, and was able to disperse his smell throughout the area to prevent anyone from pinpointing his location by nose. With 3 of the 5 senses taken out, and he highly doubted he would be licked by the Jounin, it left only touch, which was easily avoided. He stole quickly through the area, making no trail, as he moved. He was certain this was even more dangerous than depriving the man of his mask, but it had to be done. He got to the area where he needed to be, the bedroom. He snuck through the doorway, pausing a little to make sure the man's breathing was even, as he slept. He continued to the closet, and reached out with a steady hand. After making his alterations to the man's clothing, he headed to his final, and definitely most risky task. The doll on his head was almost hyperventilating from the suspense, and Naruto decided he would have to use a sort of genjutsu, instead of a physical transformation. Using his mana, he wove an intricate spell pattern through the air, the violet light flickering for a moment before it faded, showing that the spell had been cast. He then sprinted out of there, making sure to not leave any trace behind. The next morning, 9 AM. A deafening scream of no echoed across Konoha, and it would have woken them had the screamer been a bit earlier in the morning. Of course, Kakashi was always late to everything, even sunrise. Naruto, who was currently waiting with Sasuke, and Sakura at Training Ground 7 messing with his golems, nearly snickered in delight. He was positive the man would be thoroughly humiliated today, as he had cast a spell on each of the spandex suits that would last a full 24 hours, would immolate any clothing that was worn over them, and would latch onto the man's skin like a leech, preventing him from removing one. And due to the disappearance of all his other clothing, it was either spandex until finding acceptable clothing, or a towel, but Kakashi wouldn't want to go outside in only a towel. He was hard-pressed to keep a straight face, as his sensei arrived, face mask in place, as he was too damn afraid of the man catching him, should he try again to remove the mask. However, that was the only thing that was normal about his teacher. Pada Kakashi was wearing a green spandex bodysuit, which was quite form-fitting. Naruto absently noted to himself that he was a great judge of body to get the man's size correct on the first try. Kakashi's one eye was beaming with intense rage at anything and everything in the vicinity, and it would have looked quite frightening if his grey hair wasn't done in a shiny bowl cut reminiscent of Mitogai. The man's furious stare finally landed on him and his current project. He had a mini Konoha with pretty good details, and it was currently being destroyed by a Kyuubi made out of ice. He still wasn't up to par with his ice manipulation yet, as it was a relatively new element, and had to be worked with a bit longer than his daily training with the others, until he was just as proficient in it as he was in the others. Kakashi stormed up to his blonde student, intent on doing some kind of harm to him, as his newfound knowledge of the student's Jinchuriki status allowed him to blame anything and everything on him. He pointed an accusing finger at the 15-year-old, almost sputtering with rage, as he yelled at the blonde. You did this to me. Naruto looked up, cocking a slightly questioning eyebrow. He let his eyes roam over his sensei's attire, and pulled a mock-innocent face, as he replied. Oh? How are you so positive about that, Haddock-san? Do you have any proof? Kakashi started to sputter incoherently, as it was just made clear that he really didn't know who did it, but he was positive he could blame the Jinchuriki. I know you did it, you demon. You must have done it. You had to be jealous that Sasuke was getting better in his training than you were, and you tried to lash out at me for it. Naruto's lone eyebrow rose closer to his hairline at this statement. Even Kyuubi seemed to be giving the man a questioning stare. It seems that he finally figured it out. Hey, who cares? He hated me before, he'll hate me even more now. Ah well. The teen stood slowly, and gave the man a cold glare that made the ice golem of Kyuubi look like a boiling desert, nearly making the newly spandex-clad Jounin step back in fright. But he was a Jounin, and he wasn't going to let this demon intimidate him. Haddock-san, I advise you to quit making nonsensical accusations when you have no proof. I am actually quite a bit stronger than you, so, as I can defeat you in combat, I really couldn't care less what you teach Sasuke. I am quite annoyed that you would believe I would stoop so low, as to lash out at you, as you put it. However, your face mask is quite null and void at this point, as it seems someone has infiltrated your home, and was able to get quite a few pictures of your face underneath the mask. They seem to have spread all around the village, and I believe I hear your fan club coming now. The stampeding of footsteps started to shake the ground, as a loud squeal of Kakashi-kun rent the air, causing all to tremble in terror. Kakashi swiftly forgot all about his hatred of his student, and handed 3 Chunin exam applications to Sasuke, telling him he nominated the team, Red. Nominated Sasuke, but had to nominate Sakura and Naruto, as it was a team-oriented exam, for the Chunin exams, and that they would start in about a month. He then took off, hoping that he could outrun his mob of fan people. Naruto walked up to Sasuke's still shocked form, took a paper out of it, and disappeared in a swirl of snowflakes, headed towards Training Grounds 27. Training Grounds 27. Naruto arrived in his own teleportation spell with his lips slightly turned upwards in a smirk. He headed straight to Guy, tapped a finger against his own temple once, before a large screen was brought to life in the air, a still image of Kakashi's new look on it for Team 9 to see. Niji stifled a snicker, Tenten burst out laughing, and Guy and Lee started to hug each other, proclaiming that Kakashi had discovered his youthfulness at long last. He felt someone was watching him intensely, so he decided to find out who, and bid a farewell to the team before disappearing in a gust of arctic wind, giving the entire team a brief chill. He reappeared in the surrounding forest, the same gust of freezing wind accompanying him, as he appeared a few feet to the side of a Jounin who was spying on him. He decided that he was in a good mood, and wouldn't harm the man yet unless he didn't have a good reason to be spying on him, that is, and voiced his question. Why, exactly, are you spying on me, Jounin-san? Yamato, the spy, blinked rapidly in surprise at being discovered before regaining his composure. At least the teen had a bit of respect, though it was obvious he was suspicious of being spied on. He had heard a little about the fighting abilities of the blonde, due to Kakashi's lazy drawl at all the meetings he had been to, but most of the copy-nin speeches tended to be about how Sasuke was progressing. Deciding that he might as well get straight to the point, he answered, as truthfully as possible. I had seen your ability to create the fusion element of ice during the Jounin meeting yesterday, and was wondering if you were able to create any others. Naruto was a bit surprised at this, as he hadn't detected any malice from the man while he was speaking, and he seemed genuinely interested. He gave a slight shrug before answering the man, as it was a decent reason to be spying on him, though he would warn him to not attempt it again if he was fond of living. I have not been able to recreate the others to my satisfaction, so I await people with the respective bloodlines to the fusion elements to give me advice on how to combine the two. I had met a Hyotin user on my C-rank mission, and she gave me the much-needed hint to make my ice manipulation viable. I can do a little of the other fusion elemental manipulations, but nothing satisfactory to me, so I don't use them often. I have trained, as far as I can, without learning exactly how the fusion element works, and until I find someone with the bloodline to assist with that, I have hit a glass ceiling. The Jounin nodded a little, as it seemed logical enough, before making his decision. He gave a slight smile to the blonde, before disappearing in the standard whirl of leaves, his answer floating to the black mage on the wind. Well, I am Yamato, the sole user of Mokuton in Konoha. Should you be able to prove to me that you are worth it, I will give you information on how the wood element works. For now, though, I notice your ice manipulation still needs training, and I will wait for you to bring it up to par with your other elements before testing you. Naruto let a sly grin slip onto his face at this, and took it as a challenge. He disappeared in another shunshin, a large pillar of ice engulfing him, before exploding into multiple shards of ice floating in the air, before they all evaporated. He would have to train a bit more than usual before the Chunin exams, he decided. Naruto's slumbering form jolted awake at exactly 7:53 am, displacing the plush doll that was comfortably snuggled on top of his head. He was able to catch the doll before it flew too far across the room, saving the poor fox from slamming into a wall, and giving it a few scratches between the ears, before setting it down on his pillow, as he went around getting ready for a new day. Kakashi gave the team 3 days off after the incident yesterday with his newly formed fan club. He has stated that he needed to lay low for a while, but had cordially invited Sasuke to come by his house to train when he thought Naruto wasn't listening. The Black Mage nearly snorted at that. I do have to give him a grudging respect. He's able to lie all about teamwork right to my face without flinching. If he starts chucking kunai at the back of my head trying to accidentally kill me, well, he's aiming to improve my reflexes, though, I'll have to kill him. He shrugged his shoulders a bit and picked up the slowly awakening plush toy, cradling it protectively in his left arm as he set out of the house. He had decided when he was in one of his gloriously sappy optimistic moods, wasn't thinking of different ways to kill people left and right, that he would see the other two teams that graduated with him. This day would have an 89% chance of being completely worthless, with an 11% chance of getting to defend himself against his comrades, should they try to attack him. Joy. He was ready to spork someone's eye out already. Training Ground 21, 8:05 AM. Naruto remembered hearing sometime or another when he was walking around the village that teammate, led by the Genjutsu Mistress Yuhi Kurenai, always met at Training Ground 21 at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he decided he would meet his comrades. After the Kyuubi doll had fully awoken, complete with a squeaky yawn, he had told it about his plan for the day. The doll had laughed at him, having to stifle the sound in the teen's shirt, before telling him that he must have had some form of hallucinogen when he decided this. Naruto had shrugged, and replied to the doll before continuing his walk towards the training grounds. If they attack me, I can legally state I was defending myself, and use almost lethal force if necessary. Either way, it's a win-win. The doll thought this over for a minute, tapping its shin with a stuffed paw before nodding with a feral grin. It stiffened before falling motionless in his arms again, although a murmur of "I want to attack that mutt's dog, if he tries something" could be heard. Naruto had, by now, made it to the training grounds, and walked noisily to him, towards where the team was training, not wanting to be unheard in his approach. The doll had to bite its lip to avoid exploding into roaring laughter when he stepped out of the tree line, scaring all three of the genin, but the jounin was noticeably calm about it. So much for surveillance and scouting teams. Naruto merely gave a half-hearted wave to Kurenai, and stated why he was there before Kiba could think of some reason he could attack him. "Hello, Kurenai-san. My teacher is indisposed for the next 3 days due to a spontaneous fan club, but that doesn't stop him from training the great Uchiha-sama. I was wondering if I could view how your team works, since mine is quite abysmal when it comes to working together." All four blinked rapidly in surprise, as the three genin had at least expected him to attack first, and the jounin didn't really think he'd be all that polite. Kiba, being the absolute tactical genius that he was, decided to reply first before thinking. "Yeah right, demon. You just want to steal all our secrets, and kill us in our sleep." The Black Mage turned his disquieting gaze towards the Inizuka, freezing him in place with a tiny spike of killing intent. His voice was quite emotionless, though it had an unnerving edge to it. "I am speaking with your teacher, Inizuka-san. If I wanted to steal all your secrets, I would need my teacher's Sharingan, now wouldn't I? Be quiet before I silence you." The dog using Nin took about 14 seconds before he was able to reply to that, while Kurenai was trying to figure out if there was a hidden meaning within his declaration. She was about to reply when Kiba beat her to it. "The Sharingan is one of the best bloodlines in all of Konoha. How dare you mock it, demon? Akamaru, attack." The wolf-sized dog companion hesitated for a second, before charging towards Naruto with his teeth bared. Naruto gave a soft sigh of resignation, a light purple energy starting to leach from him, as he raised one hand in the air. Shino and Hinata were quite surprised, as it didn't feel like chakra at all. The energy twisted, and twined about both his arms, before flickering out of existence just, as a single word was spoken. Quake. The ground beneath the charging dog became liquid in consistency, entrapping the white-furred companion up to his neck in the substance, before hardening back to normal. The dog whimpered at his position, unable to move until it was released from the earth. Kiba was nonplussed for a moment, before his temper kicked in. "What did you do to him, you monster?" The monster in question simply rolled his purple eyes, turning his attention back to Kurenai. "Kurenai-san, perhaps I should leave. If your student continues to attack me, I will be authorized to use any means necessary to halt him, except for killing him. Though I believe I could do something just as good." The three genin stiffened and fried at his statement, wondering what horrors the demon could possibly come up with. Kurenai blinked rapidly in surprise for a moment, before nodding, and replying. "It probably would be best if Kiba is quite brash, and I don't have full control over my own students. It was good to see you, though, Naruto-san." Naruto simply nodded to her, before turning back to the trap dog. The lavender energy sprung to life once more, sparkling a little in the morning air, as the dog was lifted free of the ground, though it had a liberal dusting of soil on its fur. The Black Mage turned away, and started to walk off, causing Kiba to try to take advantage of the position. The dog Nin charged forward, doing a few hand seals before jumping into the air. "Don't turn your back on me." Tsuga, piercing fang. Kiba spun in a rapid horizontal tornado, dust and air swirling around him to transform the technique into a grinding drill. He was almost to Naruto's back when the teen turned around and backhanded him out of the spin, throwing him into a tree. The annoyance flickering in his amethyst eyes shocked him, as he was expecting pure malice. The violet aura seeped out of his skin again, feeling oddly poisonous, as a single word was spoken. Bio. A thick green mass of goo coalesced from the air, surrounding the dog Nin, and covering him from head to toe. Kiba held his breath, not wanting to find out what the stuff did, but let out a choking gasp, as it covered every inch of his skin, slipping under his clothing to do so. He felt a burning pain cover him from head to toe, not unlike sunburn, before the gelatinous mass disappeared into thin air. He tried to stand up, but to his horror, his muscles weren't working, and an intense spike of pain racked his body when he tried to move. He gave a yelp of pain, as he tried again, only to feel the pain multiplied. Kurenai rushed over to check on her student, but when she gently prodded his shoulder, he gave out another pained whimper. She looked over to Naruto, who looked quite amused, and asked a question. "What did you do?" Naruto gave a slight shrug, placing the Kyuubi doll on top of his head, as he struck an exaggerated thinking pose. "I used the gelatinous mass to act as a medium, delivering a cocktail of poisons to his system. He currently has all of his muscles paralyzed, except for the vital ones, and every single movement or touch upon his person causes intense pain. It also has no antidote, as of yet. I could remove the poison if I wanted, but I told you, if he attacked me, that I would find something to do to him. Be happy that I didn't petrify him, as I don't believe any of you would be careful enough not to drop his statue body, which would shatter him." He disappeared into a shunshin, bloody flicker, what seemed to be frozen flower petals flinging around him in a flurry, shattering all at once in a beautiful tinkling noise, as he teleported. Hokage's office. Sir Toby was having a not-so-great day. He came in at 7 AM, and found that he had more paperwork than he had left last night. Then, when he was working on it, he got a paper cut. He barely was able to rein in the urge to blast the stacks of paper with a fire, as that paper cut could have been lethal, and taken as an assassination attempt. It was now about 8:15, he was halfway through one of the stacks, and was feeling pretty good about himself. He felt the telltale signs of a shunshin, and made sure that none of the stacks would blow over from the smoke or leaves, and patiently waited for the person to appear. Imagine his surprise when Naruto appeared in a whirlwind of frozen flower petals, looking the same, as usual, actually. His hair was tied back in a high ponytail, though. If he had asked the Kyuubi doll on the subject, he would have gotten an answer of "it doesn't look as cool when your hair is always billowing out behind you, as you walk. You have to partition the days when you have intimidating hair, and days when you have it pulled back." One must wonder how the great Kyuubi no Kitsune has such ideas on the uses of hair. Naruto was the one who broke the silence first, his lips quaking into an amused smirk. "Hokage-san, if the Inizuka clan head wants to have me executed for attacking her son, kindly remind her that he tried to use Suga on me, when I had my back turned. He'll be fine in about a week, although I suppose you could have medic nins try to extract the poison. It'd be quite a challenge, I assure you. Perhaps they could take it as training." Sir Toby heaved a weary sigh before nodding. He pulled out his pipe, and started to puff it lazily, as he sorted the situation out in his mind. "What exactly did you poison him with, Naruto-kun?" The blonde's eyes twinkled with innocence, though there was a high amount of sadism hidden within. "That's a cocktail of my own specially created poisons. He can't move, and if he tries to or anyone touches him, it causes him intense pain. Very intense pain. He's lucky that I let him live for attacking me while my back was turned like that, but I think if I killed a clan heir, that the council would try to do something to me. Unfortunately, I need to train, so I don't have time to put them back into their place." The sensei nodded a bit, continuing to smoke the pipe while he mulled it over in his head. He heaved a heavy sigh, as something came to him. "Naruto-kun, why were you near teammate anyway?" The blonde teen snickered a little, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "You know, I had this crazy idea that I should get to know my comrades better, so I went to teammate's training ground. I made sure not to use the teleportation technique, and was walking quite noisily through the forest, so that I basically broadcast my position. Unfortunately, the only one that noticed was Kurenai-san. I asked her if I could see how a real team interacts, since Haddock-san is quite hypocritical, and Kiba attacked me, calling me a demon, and such nonsense. I sunk Akamaru into the ground, and asked Kurenai if I should leave. When she said that I should, I simply turned to walk away when he attacked me, so I poisoned him." The Hokage nodded, being able to clearly see the Inizuka heir being brash enough to attack without provocation. Something in the narration caught his attention, though, and brought it up. "What do you mean Kakashi-kun is hypocritical?" The blonde's lips twisted from a smirk to a slight sneer, and his voice had a poisonous edge to it, as he replied. "He constantly rambles about teamwork, tries to get us to do teamwork exercises, and claims nonsense about those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash. Of course, right after saying that he ignores both Aruno-san and I, and privately trains the Uchiha when he thinks that nobody is looking. I distinctly heard him offer training at his household to Sasuke, while he was claiming he was laying low to escape his fan club. The Hokage gave a start in surprise at the claim, pulling out his crystal ball and homing in on Kakashi's chakra signature. To his surprise, he was in the backyard of his home, showing Sasuke a new technique and telling him to copy it with the Sharingan. The purple-eyed teen heaved a bored sigh as he watched the Uchiha heir actually fumble at copying the technique. Haddock-san told us that the teen would have 3 days off and then pull the Uchiha to the side to offer private training. I bet his sensei would be rolling over in the grave by now if he already wasn't due to the treatment of the precious Jinchuriki. There was so much sarcasm in the last 2 words that the Hokage could have sworn some of the paperwork was combusted from the statement. He looked up from the crystal ball with a slightly nonplussed expression on his face. The Ondame's team was always taught that teamwork was everything. How could he have fallen so far? The blonde nearly snorted in disbelief before replying in a scathing tone. Perhaps it's the bribery or the prestige that comes with teaching the wonderful Uchiha-sama. If he focuses a bit, I'm sure he could break Haruno-sen's fangirl tendencies, but that would take effort, which is blasphemous in his mind. So, he uses his implanted thieving eye to steal techniques, and then to teach the stolen techniques to the Uchiha. I feel immensely sorry for Gai-san, as I'm sure Haddock-san used their rivalry to copy a few Taijutsu styles. I am going to go see Team 10, as I'm sure your son wouldn't be beast against me. So far the only decent team I have viewed was Gai-san's team. Good day, Hokage-san. The blonde disappeared in a storm of ice needles, proving that he could turn a teleportation technique into an offensive gesture, when the needles flew through the air to disappear right before they could impale the dreaded paperwork. Training Ground 10, 8:30 am. Naruto appeared in a tree overlooking Team 10, the branch below him frosting over from the ice elemental Shunshin before evaporating. He leaned back against the trunk, wondering how he should approach Sarutobi Asuma, the Sandame's son, without seeming to be hostile. Unfortunately, he was too far into his thoughts to notice a shadow creeping up the trunk and latching onto his shadow. He blinked a little, startled, before he remembered that the Nara clan used shadow techniques. He heaved a soft sigh, wondering when Nara would come out of hiding. It took about 10 seconds before Shikamaru, the pineapple hairstyle genin, walked out of the foliage below the tree and regarded him with a suspicious gaze. He, too, had been told the stories of the demon child, but he wasn't a genius for nothing. He could tell there were things off with that story, and decided to hold his judgment until he knew the flaxen-haired teen a little more. He couldn't be as bad as the stories, right? He spoke up, noticing that the blonde really didn't seem surprised at all. Why are you here? He could feel the smirk coming from the black mage, and it unnerved him a little. He shouldn't be able to escape the Kajimane, shadow imitation. Unfortunately, that thought was snuffed out when the blonde in the branches faded into thin air, to appear right next to him with an amused smirk twitching at his lips. His voice was emotionless, showing nothing about his thoughts. I came here to speak with your teacher about something, but I do have to congratulate you on capturing me with that technique. Not many people are able to catch me off guard. Shikamaru nodded a little, still quite suspicious of the behavior shown. Before he could ask how he escaped the shadow technique, a piercing scream of Shikamaru came from a clearing not too far away, making Naruto clutch his ears in pain. The blonde looked at him incredulously, and even the fox doll on his head seemed to be reeling from the sound. How do you stand it every day? I think she's possibly worse than Haruno-sen. Shikamaru gave a shrug before pulling some earplugs out of his ears. His reply nearly made Naruto snicker at the genius. I read lips and block out sounds. After the shadow manipulator replaced the earplugs, he led the blonde to where his team was currently training. As they both walked out of the foliage, Naruto had to deal with the shriek of "What's he doing here?" The black mage had to forcefully suppress the urge to try to emulate the needle Turk Haku use, thinking it wouldn't look good if he attacked the banshee without a better reason than "she makes my ears bleed." Naruto, finally getting the ringing sensation out of his ears, replied with a shrugging of his shoulders and pointing towards the bearded Jounin. I wanted to speak with Asuma-san, Yamanaka-san. Ino and Choji were instantly suspicious, both being quite biased against the golden-haired genin. Shikamaru, for fear that he would be ostracized, hadn't told anyone else of his suspicions that the demon child's stories were propaganda. Sarutobi Asuma, the trench knife Jounin, looked quite surprised at the declaration, though he held no ill will towards the black mage. His father had told him that, while brutal and sadistic, the teen was quite polite until angered. Ino was fuming at the demon brat who wanted to speak with her teacher, and was about to scream at him, when a needle of ice struck her in the side of the neck. It wasn't in the vital pressure point to throw her into a near-death state, but it did prevent her from speaking. Choji and Shikamaru tensed at the attack, before Naruto slightly allayed their fears, and caused Asuma to stifle a snicker. The voice is causing more pain to me than most physical wounds, and I feel it is an attack on my person. She will be silent for about 10 minutes after the needle is removed, and no harm has befallen her, aside from the lack of speech. I apologize, Asuma-san, as my real intention for coming here was to speak to you, not to silence your banshee student. Asuma nodded to the teen, before asking the question on all their minds. What did you want to speak with me about? The blonde non-banshee's lips quivered a little, his eyes glinting in slight mischief, as he replied. I actually wanted to see how a real team interacts. Haddock-san, while decent in combat, shows quite a bit of favoritism to the Uchiha, preferring to train him over just about anything else. I believe he was trying to have me killed when he set me up to fight against Momochi's abuser in our C-rank mission, but I digress. I have heard much about this supposed teamwork from his ravings, while he pandered to the Uchiha's every whim, and I wanted to see if it was all it was cracked up to be. Asuma broke down in snickering fits of laughter by the time Naruto had finished his heavily sarcastic monologue. He got himself under control, while Shikamaru was in his thinking pose, and Choji was eating chips. Ino was waiting for the silencing effects of the needle to wear off, as she had pulled it out, while the golden-haired teen was speaking. He finally was able to respond, quelling his amusement at the situation. Alright, I suppose. I can let you watch our team train, and you can see for yourself that teamwork is a great concept. However, I wanted to ask you something that I had seen in the Jounin meeting yesterday, as well as just now with Ino. How is it that you were able to use the element of ice? And without hand seals, no less. The boy rummaged around in his pockets for a bit, tongue sticking out the side of his mouth, as he tried to find something. He finally pulled out a note card with his prepared speech of how I do things on it, and read it out loud. Bloodline thing. He quickly stashed the card away, looking quite innocent. The doll on his head started to fidget a little, though only Asuma noticed. The bearded Jounin nodded politely to the golden-haired teen, allowing him to watch, as his team went through the teamwork tactics and drills, capitalizing on the different abilities of the Akamichi, Yamanaka, and Nara clans. Shikamaru would capture something in his Kajimane, Choji would use his Baika no Jutsu, multi-size technique, and flatten it with his Nikkiden Sensha, meat bullet tank. Or, Shikamaru would capture a target, and Ino would use her Shintenshin no, mind-body switch technique, to possess it. They worked on meshing their abilities more fluidly, as well as training Choji to be able to steer his Nikkiden Sensha more accurately. Ino had to work on the speed of her soul, as it shot out of her body to possess the target, and Shikamaru had to train in being able to extend his shadow further with less shadows nearby to work with. Asuma forced his team to work on their Taijutsu next, noticing that Ino and Shikamaru were quite lax in that area. Naruto had offered to give them some incentive to be enthusiastic about it, and had summoned a few ice needles, as well as a few viciously sharpened ice sporks from the air to prove his point. Needless to say, the Taijutsu training was the best the two had in ages, though they glared continuously at the enigmatic blonde for the threat. Naruto noticed that something was missing from their repertoire, and asked Asuma why they hadn't learned any elemental yet. The Jounin had scratched one of his sideburns, laughing nervously, as he had replied that I never got around to finding out their affinities. The blonde had snickered a little, before reminding him politely that their academy techniques and single clan each would only get them so far, and that they should be able to at least have one defensive elemental technique, in case they face someone with offensive elemental techniques. He even created a miniature battlefield, complete with golems resembling Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru, as well as one unknown nin, and showed both scenarios. The Jounin had nodded, looking quite impressed at the tactical advantages that ability would have, before pushing his team into target practice. Naruto was meditating, as he watched the projectiles start flying, doing his own training, as ice crystals formed in the air around him. The air started to sparkle from the crystals, as they grew more numerous, before combining with each other to make a flawless multifaceted prism in front of the Black Mage. The prism hovered in the air, about the same size as a human, humming a bit from the energy within it. Naruto had a spark of ingenuity, and stepped forward to the prism, and placed a hand on it, focusing hard on something. If he remembered correctly, Haku was able to seem to melt into the ice, and move at high speeds from mirror to mirror, almost like a toned-down Shunshin at will. Team 10 stopped what they were doing, as Ino gasped in shock. They all looked to where she was pointing, and watched, as Naruto melted into the prism, his reflection appearing on every facet of the ice. The boy seemed oddly contemplative in each of the reflections, before the prism shattered, each facet moving to a specific area. Soon enough, the clearing was surrounded by reflections of Naruto and ice fragments, each with a Kyuubi doll perched on their shoulders. His voice seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at the same time, as he spoke with an amused tone. I think I figured out Imakyu Hayasho, demonic ice mirrors. It's quite disconcerting to see from every angle, though. The fragments shattered one by one until there was but one mirror left, and Naruto stepped outwards from it, seeming to melt out of the surface before the last mirror shattered, as well. He looked a little winded from the manipulation, but his lips quivered upwards in a slight smirk, as he scratched the side of his cheek. Sorry about the interruption. I remembered a friend of mine that was able to do that, and wanted to see if I was able to replicate it. I'm still not good enough with my ice manipulation to do it, as well as she was, though, so I need to go train. Thank you, Asuma-san, for allowing me to watch your students actually perform, as a team. Farewell. The large ice mirror coalesced out of the thin air, and Naruto melted into it before it disappeared, subliming into the air from which it was spawned. Team 10 was quite surprised at the control that the boy showed, and Shikamaru rolled all these thoughts around in his head. He should probably speak with the golden-haired teen in private one of these days to get the full story out of him. Perhaps they could play Shogi or Go. Training Ground 44, Forrest of Death, 11 AM. A thin sheet of ice condensed out of the air, allowing a blonde teen to step out of it before it evaporated back into the atmosphere. Naruto shook himself lightly to get rid of the odd feeling of being trapped within a mirror, and spread his senses outward to make sure he wouldn't be interrupted in his training. He couldn't feel anyone's presence nearby, so he sat down against the trunk of a tree and slipped into a meditative trance. Feeling around within the flow of mana within him for the different strands of each element, he found one with a slight kiss of winter imbued within it. He gently tugged it free of the rest, and began to weave it in a precise pattern, as one would a tapestry. In his mind's eye, a light blue thread of magic spun at an almost inhuman speed, as it surged through the mana construct for a new spell he had come up with. After finishing it once, he destroyed the construct, and forced the power through it again, and again, and again. He continued to weave until he began to get a splitting headache from the practice, drawing him out of his work to calm his mind from the pain. His lips twitched upwards in a slight smile unconsciously, as thoughts meandered throughout his mind, catching parts of one or two before they disappeared. One fully constructed memory came to him, causing his smile to whiten a little. Flashback. Haku leaned in close to his ear, her soft voice whispering lightly, as she passed on her hint on ice manipulation, causing the black mage to stiffen, before giving her heartfelt hug and thanks. To manipulate the element of ice, you must remember that all elements have a mind of their own. Ice is a very vain element, preferring to sculpt itself than to let you do it. To truly manipulate the element to your will, always remember that the water is the raw material, and the wind is the hammer and chisel, molding it and shaping it to your whim. Ice combines the whimsical nature of wind with the amorphous state of water, allowing ice to take any form it wishes to in any situation. This is your hint, and I hope you do well with your manipulation, Naruto-kun. Then flashback. His headache finally ceased its relentless pounding within his skull, allowing him to lean back and relax as he wove his ice spells over and over. He would let the element have a bit of leeway on its own, allowing it to sculpt itself to a point, but he refused to let it off a short leash. It may wish to mold itself, but he needed it to work in a certain way. So long as he got most of the molding done, he would let the element do whatever it wished, as he only needed so much to make sure the spell did its work correctly. The air around him glittered and whirled as he continued to train his ice manipulation, creating a beautiful sight that only Naruto was witness to. Throughout the day, and most of the night, he continued to toy with the element, trying to find the most efficient way possible to manipulate it before going back to his living quarters, determined to sleep in his soft bed. 3 weeks later, 8:30 AM. His ice manipulation training had been going extremely well. It still was a bit behind his other elements, but he didn't mind too much. The element was quite an interesting one to work with, as almost all the spells he could come up with were offensive in nature. If he was working on a defensive black magic spell, he would use earth, as it was much sturdier than fragile ice. He pushed those thoughts out of his mind for now, as he walked steadily along one of the streets in Konoha. His mind inevitably went back to his memory, forcing him to remember a few of the training sessions with his team. He had to deal with Kakashi's malevolent glaring almost constantly, and he was almost positive the man was trying to train Sasuke to assassinate him. He really didn't care that much, as his words still rang true. He was stronger than Kakashi, therefore he didn't give a damn what the man trained the Uchiha, as the Uchiha would only become as great as Kakashi. That would be false if Sasuke ever tried to do something original, or tried to do something aside from copying, but nah. He wasn't smart enough to realize that true power comes from training, not from shortcuts due to bloodlines. He thought about one day in particular, where he had met with Shikamaru, and played against the Shadow User in a game of Shogi. He had ended up losing, but didn't mind all that much. The brunette was a tactical genius, thinking many steps ahead of where he was. Besides, most of his mind was thinking along with their conversation that they had within the safety of Naruto's apartment, centering mainly on the rumors about him. He had to stifle a snicker at some of the embellishments, such as how he ate people alive, or how he had 9 hidden foxtails, proving that he was the Kyuubi. The game had ended on a slightly better note, though Naruto was still quite indifferent to the Shadow User. Who cares if he had changed one person's views from beast to neutral? Most of the village was too stupid to notice or care, and would continue their witch hunt for the demon child. Good thing they couldn't find his apartment, or he might have to do something drastic. He pushed those thoughts away, pondering about purchasing a stainless steel spork weapon for his doll, as claws, tails, nails, and fangs will only get you so far, and that spork will get you further. The doll snickered a little at the imagery of a plush doll wielding an eating utensil. Naruto thought it would help him look more harmless, so that when someone ignored him, then the real havoc could begin. However, the ability to hold the spork would clue the enemies into the fact that the doll was able to move, thoroughly discrediting his idea. His mind whirled back to another recollection from the past 3 weeks, when he had spent some time with Guy at the Jounin's apartment. Naruto had recounted in great detail how to train in his hand-to-hand style. He warned Guy not to show any of his notes to the council, though, as their one-track mind would probably force all children under the age of 6 to go through the training. While it looked good on paper to have an army of highly evasive shinobi, having only one style in an entire village would be a major detriment to the variety. Besides that, if all the ninjas in Konoha knew the one style, then everyone would know what to expect and prepare accordingly. Of course, none of the council would think about that. They'd just think impressive Taijutsu style ancient and very powerful before their minds would immediately come to the conclusion of mass produce. When he had finally left the spandex-clad Jounin's apartment, the man had over 20 pages filled with notes on how to train in this style. Naruto had agreed to create diagrams for the katas within the style, as Guy would have to have them in the manual as well. Guy was too far in his years to sufficiently train in the style, as his body was fully formed and wouldn't take too well to the intense flexibility training. They both agreed that only children deemed worthy of the style would be taught it, and only one at a time. It wouldn't do to have an entire class on this style. Naruto had the idea of calling the style a Mito clan seeker style, so that only Guy could pass it on. When asked why Naruto didn't want it to be his clan style, the Black Mage simply replied, "Do you think the council would believe me?" I had to admit, it was quite possible that they'd vote against it, and try to have him teach it to Sasuke. Of course that would lead to unnecessary deaths, and Naruto was too busy training to have to deal with genocide. As Naruto continued walking aimlessly around the village, he heard a pained yelp coming from a child in a nearby alleyway. He swiftly changed his trajectory, heading towards where the sound came from, and had to stifle a slight snicker as he heard a roar. That hurt, brat. He rounded the corner into the alleyway, noticing that two Tsunagenin were currently glaring at a child no older than 8, who seemed to be the Hokage's grandson. The child in question was being held by the collar of his shirt by the male Tsunagenin, who was dressed in a black jumpsuit with what looked to be cat ears on the hood. There was also a bandage package strapped to his back. The female Tsunagenin was dressed in a short-sleeved thigh-length battle kimono, with a battle fan strapped across her back. Naruto noticed something odd in the air, and spread his senses out to find out what it was. He felt a distinct demonic energy coming from the tree nearby, coupled with an aura of malice and bloodthirst. The Kyuubi doll currently perched on his shoulder had quickly whispered in his ear that it was the Chibi no Tanuki, Sabaku no Shikaku, one-tailed raccoon dog, Shikaku of the desert sands. The blonde teen gave a slight yawn, before leveling a pointed glare towards the male Tsunagenin holding on to Konohamaru. His voice was quite unnerving to the two, as it reminded them far too much of their younger brother. "While I hold no love for this village, I should warn you that you are currently holding on to the Hokage's grandson, and any threat to him could start a war." The young man in the black jumpsuit swiftly dropped the child, stepping back in slight fear of the fact that he was just about to beat up a relative of the Hokage. The child sprinted from the alleyway, tears flowing down his face, as he escaped peril. Naruto heaved a bored sigh, as he turned to leave the alleyway, his blonde hair billowing out behind him, as he strode away from the Tsunagenin. Before he could make his fifth step, a monotone voice had called out behind him, the indifferent tone barely hiding true intentions. "You? Who are you?" Naruto, seeing a chance to possibly perk up his absurdly boring day, had slowly turned to face the red-headed genin, wearing a rather heavy gourd on his back, his clothing looking a bit loose and baggy on him. "My name is Naruto. However, if your Biju weren't an insane sand monster, he would have informed you of something else. Farewell, Jinchuriki of the Chibi no Tanuki, Sabaku no Shikaku." Before waiting for an answer from the shell-shocked trio, he disappeared in a swirl of snowflakes. Naruto's apartment. Deciding that he would have to train inside for the next week to avoid unnecessary confrontations with insane Jinchurikis, Naruto sat in the lotus position to begin his ice training. The doll on his shoulder was nearly choking with laughter, should dolls be able to choke. Apparently, Kyuubi had a slight grudge against the Tanuki, as the sand demon never really was in the right state of mind. The teen settled into a deep state of meditation, absolutely positive that no intruder would be able to interrupt. He started on his news project, creating a version of Haku's Makyo Hyasho, demonic ice mirrors, not wanting to seem like he simply ripped off the technique. He was going to take the basics of the ability, namely melting into something made out of ice, surrounding the enemy, and attacking from all sides while you cannot be attacked until all the ice constructs are shattered, and make something of his own out of it. For the rest of the week he bounced ideas off of the Kyuubi, running scenarios through his head once in a while, as he tried to perfect the technique in his mind. About 3 days before the Chunin exams, he began to work on bringing it from theory into reality. For 2 days straight he lay in deep meditation, finally awakening at 11:49 p.m. the day before the exams. He slipped into his bed, bidding a soft goodnight to the doll nearby, as he drifted into slumber. The next day, 7:30 a.m. He awoke with a start to the ringing of an alarm clock, smashing the evil contraption almost absent-mindedly, as he went through his daily hygiene routine. The doll seemed to be bleary-eyed with sleep, as he came back into his bedroom, fully clothed, though his hair was still wet. He picked the doll up gently, and cradled it in his arms, giving a soft snicker, as the doll rubbed at his eyes with a very human-like gesture. On his way towards the academy for the first part of the exams, his mind whirled with different thoughts of what the different parts would be. He knew part 1 was a paper test, part 2 was a survival test, and part 3 was a tournament. He nearly groaned in exasperation, fully knowing he would fail that damn paper test since he never studied. He was a practical learner, and despised shinobi history in general. It was far too inaccurate. Other histories, though, such as history of art, history of ninjutsu, history of sports, and so on, were fine, as those were mostly accurate. Damn historians, and rewriting history in favor of the winners. He shoved homicidal thoughts towards evil civilians in libraries further away from the front of his mind, as he came up to the front door. He sat against a tree trunk, deciding to wait on his teammates to arrive. Whatever would happen during these exams, he would not be holding back.
That's it for today guys. I hope you enjoyed my video and see you in the next part of this video. Till then, sayonara.